They keep trying to trick us into believing something is popular, so then we go out and buy it. I'm getting so sick and tired of watching both game developers and games media gaslighting the audience and themselves rather than just calling things out for what they are. You need to throw up a signal flare when there's an issue, but they want to keep handing out consolation prizes, and then they wonder why studios close down. How do you not recognize that you are exacerbating this issue? Avowed is one of the biggest copes I have ever seen. Game developers and journalists self-congratulating when the numbers and the player sentiment are telling a completely different story. It doesn't make any sense to me. I'm struggling to tell the difference between article and advertisement this week. It's like they want to wish success into existence. That doesn't work. I'm getting Dragon Age the Veilguard deja vu all over again. Look, I don't think that Avowed is an objectively bad game. I've played it. We're going to end up talking about that, but it's just a fine game. It's an okay game, but okay isn't acceptable from a studio as storied, experienced, or as prestigious as Obsidian. We should expect more from them. They should expect more from themselves. But the funny thing is that they don't. The industry doesn't want you to expect more. These studios don't want you to expect more. And this studio specifically doesn't expect more from themselves. This is a growing issue in the games industry. It's poisoning the culture of some of these studios because they're not just accepting mediocrity. They're aiming for it. Not my words, theirs. But before we get into that, a word from today's sponsor, Exit Lag. You know what's worse than getting outplayed? Losing because of lag. Nothing kills a match faster than high ping, packet loss, and random disconnects. That's where Exit Lag comes in. Exit Lag optimizes your connection with AI route optimization, a dynamic stabilizer, and a diagnostic center, ensuring that you get the best connection to over 2,000 games worldwide. It works by finding the fastest, most stable route to game servers, reducing ping and eliminating stuttering so you can focus on actually playing the game instead of fighting your internet. Setting it up is easy. Just download Exit Lag, create an account, pick your game, and activate the best route with a single click. I tested it myself, and before using Exit Lag, my ping was all over the place. After turning it on, stable, smooth, and no more lag spikes. Right now, you can get 50% off an annual plan, so there's no reason to deal with bad connections ever again. And they also offer squad plans, letting you and up to 4 friends optimize your connections together so the entire team can stay lag-free. Get a 3-day free trial using the link or the QR code on screen and experience lag-free gaming yourself. Play with Exit Lag on. Thank you to Exit Lag for sponsoring this video. Avowed has to be one of the strangest launches I've seen in years because when it was first announced, the hype was undeniable. It was positioned as Obsidian's answer to Skyrim, at least by the fans. It was a return to first-person RPGs from a studio that's known for one of the best in the genre. But as the release date crept closer, something strange happened. The buzz just vanished. Nobody seemed to care about the game anymore. The game barely got marketed, conversation among players was dead silent, and then by the time it launched, it felt like nobody actually even cared about it. I was still interested. I've enjoyed Grounded, and I loved New Vegas, and while I haven't played Pillars of Eternity, I was excited to see what Obsidian could do with a first-person fantasy RPG. I wasn't expecting Skyrim, but I was expecting something that would at least try to stand alongside it. But as time passed, my optimism faded. The warning signs were all there. Xbox barely promoted the game. The general audience showed no real excitement, and it was set to launch in the same month as Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 and Monster Hunter Wilds. From my perspective, that looks like you're trying to hide the game. And it looks like that's exactly what happened because Avowed's $90 early access period peaked at just 13,000 players on Steam. With a full launch hit, that number barely crawled to 17,000 players. The immediate excuses I'm seeing are, but it's on Game Pass, as if that somehow invalidates the reality of what we're seeing. Steam's concurrent player count doesn't tell the whole story, true, but it does indicate a trend, and if a game is a massive hit on Game Pass, well, it's going to be an even bigger success on Steam. We've already seen plenty of games launch both on Steam and Game Pass while pulling huge numbers. Palworld had 15 million copies sold and 10 million players on Game Pass. Over 2 million concurrent players on Steam. Stalker 2, 100,000 concurrent players on Steam despite also launching on Game Pass. Starfield, over 300 concurrent players on Steam, even with day one Game Pass availability. If a game is truly successful, it's successful everywhere, and right now, Avowed is not doing well. That's obvious to me, to most players that are paying attention, and to anyone that's looking at the numbers without blinders on, but that's not the narrative that games journalists are pushing right now. Instead, they're trying to manufacture success with articles like, Avowed is already a big hit on Steam, celebrating a measly 17,000 concurrent players on Steam as if that's something to brag about. Avowed tops bestsellers list on Steam despite backlash, pretending that the chart placement somehow means anything despite the fact that the competition that's on there are weeks-old releases and games that aren't even out yet. Avowed hits impressive Steam chart milestone before its release, hyping up a meaningless number that's outweighed by a complete lack of long-term engagement. I'm so tired of seeing all this media spin. You're not my GameStop rep trying to sell me a game, you're media outlets that are supposed to be covering industry news. It's the same pathetic gaslighting we saw with Dragon Age the Veilguard, a game that was supposed to have topped the Steam charts and was declared a strong seller despite completely failing to gain any traction with players. Ultimately, even EA acknowledged that it was a failure. But let's be real, Avowed's failure isn't just about the weak sales numbers, it's about how this game got here in the first place. Xbox's marketing for Avowed was non-existent. It felt like it just got dumped onto the market with no fanfare, no build-up, and no attempt to get the players excited or involved. If you haven't followed the news closely, then you barely even know that Avowed was coming out. But what makes matters even worse is the only real marketing that this game has got over the last year, well, it came from the art director torpedoing the game. Instead of trying to build hype for Avowed, the art director Matt Henson took to Blue Sky to rant about Elon Musk and identity politics in video games. And not only did he make it about himself, he dragged Avowed into it, turning it into a political talking point instead of an exciting RPG. This is the first time in months that people were even talking about Avowed, and it was actually because the developer hijacked it for his own personal agenda. I've talked about this before, but this is a growing problem in the industry. Developers don't seem to understand what they say impacts their games. We live in a world where half the audience is terminally online, and alienating a portion of that audience can completely derail any momentum a game has. This is a leadership issue. You have your key creatives out there, and they feel comfortable using your game as a soapbox for their personal beliefs. This is telling me two things. You have no control over your employees, and you do not care how players perceive your game. When the only notable thing about your game before launch is controversy, you're setting yourself up for failure. The uncomfortable truth that no one in the media wants to talk about or say out loud is that Obsidian and Xbox set themselves up for failure, not only just allowing one of their developers to hijack their product for personal reasons, but also for a failure to manage expectations and genuinely trying to connect with their audience. This isn't just marketing and management incompetence, it's a complete breakdown of studio leadership. Now they're paying the price for it. But if you guys really want to know why Avowed isn't selling, let me go ahead and play you guys the game's first trailer.
We have always known war. It forged our empire, turned heroes into queens and kings, and decimated our foes. Now our oaths are lost, forsaken. And you must face the monsters our sins have borne. Is an oath worth the weight of a crown?
We were teased a dark, broody, gritty world, a narrator weaving a tale of conflict and high-stakes adventure. Yet years later, Obsidian revealed that the game's actual art direction and story didn't really line up with players' expectations. Instead of a mature, grounded fantasy RPG setting like people had imagined, we got yet another pink, purple, neon-soaked game using a soft modern art aesthetic that has infected so many games today. Instead of immersive, distinct character designs, we got the same androgynous, feature-muted male and female characters that, well, we just keep seeing audiences reject. Who's lining up for that? Who's getting excited for that? Nobody. And I would bet good money that Dragon Age the Veilguard's disastrous reception probably led a lot of players to be a lot more cautious of Avowed because of how similar these games looked. You know, I hear game developers and journalists whining that players need to respect creative freedom and expression, but where the hell is that creative freedom when all of these games are starting to look the same? Now, of course, developers can change their art direction. I'm not saying that they can't. That's not the issue here. The issue is the radio silence for 3 years, followed by a bait-and-switch reveal that left players confused and disinterested. At that point, people just tuned out. You can't do that, especially not today. And this isn't just an Avowed problem. This is an industry-wide problem. Developers need to engage with their audience. They need to see how players are responding. They need critical feedback early, not just validation from industry insiders and coworkers, especially when they're taking radical shifts in art direction, tone, and atmosphere. Larian Studios' publishing director made a really great point about this. While they didn't mention Avowed specifically, let's be honest, they're talking about Avowed, or at least Dragon Age the Veilguard. But he said, "You can't wait to see if a game resonates with players. It's insane. Why wait and see? It's a strategic play. Build resonance before launch. Set expectations, under promise, over deliver. The latter may sound crazy, but it's far less crazy than saying something didn't resonate in a financial report like that's a surprise. It shouldn't be a surprise. It should be a process." And this is exactly what Xbox and Obsidian didn't do. Developers need to be direct with their vision, be transparent. Imagine how different the reception would have been if Obsidian had communicated these changes earlier, when player feedback actually could have meant something. Instead, they just dropped a trailer that players immediately rejected, downvoted, and yelled at, and then they launched a game to an audience that didn't even want it. Look at the difference in viewership from the initial teaser trailer, 1.8 million views, to the actual launch trailer of 99,000 views. What does that tell you? You know, on top of that, imagine how different things would have been if Xbox and Obsidian had held their developers accountable, if they had fired Matt Hansen and disavowed his use of the game as a weapon in a culture war. Instead of letting a key developer drag Avowed into controversy, they had made a clear message that their focus was on the game, not politics. Think about how many players would have rallied behind the game out of respect. How can they not see these easy layups here? You need transparency and you need respect to build trust with your audience. Xbox and Obsidian had neither. I don't understand how these companies think that they can continue to be successful while excluding their audience and remaining silent. Or worse, mocking them and alienating them. The games that resonate, that build a dedicated player base, are the ones that developers are actually engaging with their fans, setting clear expectations, and delivering on their promises. But Obsidian, Xbox, they did none of that. They refused to listen, they refused to market, they refused to control their own people, and now they're learning the hard way that if you ignore your audience, well, your audience is going to ignore you. This might sound like it's coming out of left field, but I think that game developers need to disconnect from politics. And some people are going to agree with me and be like, yeah, I don't want to hear their opinion. And I get where you're coming from, but what I'm actually saying is that, like, just in general, it's just not good for people. Whatever your political leaning is. Look at the news cycle given any channel. It's constantly, you're doomed, we're doomed, we're doomed, we're doomed, we're back, we're doomed, we're back. You're going to be spiraling all of the time if you're constantly dialed into that stuff. That's not healthy. And eventually you're going to feel like the walls are closing in on you, like the world is on fire. And in some cases, the world is on fire, but what the fuck are you going to do about it? You make video games. So then you start putting it into your video games, your opinions, or your beliefs, or the things that you're afraid of, or what you're trying to fight against. And since this industry has a lot of people that share the same opinions, well, all of a sudden, all these games start looking the same, playing the same, sounding the same. They're destroying the relationships with their studios. They're destroying the relationships with their audience. It's just not good for the industry. At least that's my perspective. You're welcome to disagree, but I think it's something that these studios need to route out. Well, I think the controversy had an effect on the game's reception. I think more than anything, it's just the tonal shift and the art change from the first trailer to what the game actually became. Because players came and they were like, oh, I went to the butcher and all they were selling was Wonder Meat. It's just not what players were expecting. It's not what they're excited for. It's not what they're asking for. And I think it's time to realize that Obsidian is not the studio that you think they are. Most people are basing their opinions on Obsidian off of New Vegas or Pillars of Eternity. It's been 7 years since Pillars of Eternity 2. It's been 15 years since Fallout New Vegas. Things have changed. Look at their last few games. They're competent, but they're forgettable. Outer Worlds, it had style, but the writing was bad. The world felt static. The RPG mechanics weren't all that good. Grounded was a fine game. Pentiment was a thing. But that's the thing. They aren't failing to live up to their expectations. I think that, they're not failing to live up to their potential. This is their potential. I think that's what this is. They're not aiming to be the studio that made New Vegas or try to make better than New Vegas. They're not chasing innovation or excellence. They're chasing okay. So if they've lowered their standards that much, why should the players have any higher of expectations? We shouldn't. And they don't want us to. Now, initially, I thought that Avowed was underperforming for the quality it delivers. I've played the game for around 15 hours, and there were a lot of things that I genuinely liked. I think spellcasting feels really good. Combat in general feels really good, which is pretty rare for a first-person RPG. The world is dense rather than expansive, which I actually appreciate. Exploration has its moments, and Performance on day one is pretty solid. On paper, this should be a pretty decent RPG, but the longer you actually play it, the more the game just feels lifeless. Like, the world might be dense, but it's not reactive. It's Dragon Age the Veilguard in first person. Exploration is not rewarding. The environments feel static, and you quickly realize that every area just boils down to the same bandits, skeletons, bears, and lizards. After a few hours, you just feel stuck in place. There's no real variety, no sense of discovery, just a repetitive loop of looting upgrade materials, collecting coins, and reading dull notebook entries. Let's be honest, nobody's playing an Obsidian game for the combat. People are coming for the writing, the characters, and the depth. Pillars of Eternity, the very foundation of this world, was built on that. But Avowed, there's just nothing. No urgency, no emotion, no tension. You crash land on a hostile island with only one other survivor, and you're both acting like it's just another Tuesday. The world is dangerous, but nobody seems to care. I knew I was in trouble when 3 hours in, I was already starting to skip dialogue. Modern RPGs have this obsession with exposition dumping, constantly bombarding the player with highlighted phrases that they don't understand, giving zero context, and then piling more exposition on top of that. Avowed is exhausting in that way. When I found myself fixating on the characters and the story, I had realized that Avowed is suffering from the same problem that Starfield did. A better RPG launched within the same window, and I just can't accept mediocrity anymore. If you go to play Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 and then you go play Avowed, the difference is staggering. In Kingdom Come 2, characters react to you. If you get drunk, Henry is slurring his words, wobbling about. He can barely hold himself together in dialogue scenes. If you commit crimes, townspeople remember you, guards hunt you down, and the world shifts to your actions. If I pick a lock, I actually pick a lock. If I steal, there are consequences. If I murder an NPC, I'll hang for it. Then I go back to Avowed, and none of that exists. The game just feels dead. Hell, NPCs don't even move around town. They just stand in place. Enemies don't free roam. They stay in static positions. It's just a world in stasis. Gabe Newell had a really good quote in a documentary where he said, "If I go up to a wall and shoot it, it feels like it's ignoring me. I'm getting a narcissistic injury when the world is ignoring me." And that's exactly how Avowed feels. It's a game that doesn't respond to you. It ignores you. Now, I don't need every RPG to be Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 or Baldur's Gate 3. I don't think I need that level of reactivity every single time. But when you're charging $90 for early access and $70 for full release, I would at least expect you're trying to reach for it. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, Warhorse Studios, the people that made that game have less funding and less developers. Tell me how it's unfair to compare these two things when Obsidian should be the one that's the unfair comparison to make against Warhorse. The whole game feels front-loaded, like a rushed essay where the first few paragraphs get the most effort, but the rest is just filler. Kai, the one character that you get at the very beginning, he's a pretty solid character, but it's obvious that he was the one that was written first. Everyone else, forgettable. The deeper you go, the more Obsidian just ran out of steam. But come to find out, they didn't run out of steam. This is what they wanted to deliver because they want acceptable work, not exceptional work. And that's how they plan to make their studio last for 100 years, apparently. In an article written by PC Gamer titled, "Obsidian won't chase huge profits or grow aggressively. That's how it's going to last 100 years in the RPG business. Are we serious? Yes." Tyler Wilde writes, "Obsidian's 100-year plan isn't, and I hope this isn't disappointing, a decade-by-decade breakdown of future projects that ends somewhere around Fallout Old Vegas. I'm assuming pre-apocalyptic settings are popular in 2103. It's more of a thought exercise, but Morgan and Birch said that they genuinely want Obsidian to continue beyond their lifespans. Are we serious? Yes." And Morgan said, "Why not? Nintendo was founded in 1889. One of the pillars of the plan is staying lean and invested, meaning small enough that none of Obsidian's employees feel like a cog in the machine. Morgan and Birch said in recent years they had considered opening multiple international studios, but they decided to partner with existing studios rather than weakening Obsidian's culture by getting too big. Leanness can also refer to Obsidian's games. It doesn't aim for unprecedented scale or the most advanced graphics, and before greenlighting a game, Birch and the studio spent a lot of time determining how much to invest on a project with the assumption that it will be a mild success, not a smash hit. Now, I'll be honest, on the surface, this sounds like a smart, sustainable approach. It's actually what I've been asking a lot of these studios to do. Stay lean, keep expectations in check, and not sink into the same trap as other studios that are overextending themselves with bloated budgets and impossible sales targets. In an industry where companies are collapsing left and right, Obsidian's strategy makes sense. But then you get to the part where they assume that every game will be a mild success, and that's where everything starts to click into place. This is why Avowed feels so lifeless, because it was never designed to be anything more than good enough. The writing, the world, the mechanics all feel like they were built to be serviceable, not groundbreaking, and you can see that pretty much across the game. Obsidian isn't trying to push boundaries. They aren't trying to make the next great RPG. They're trying to make a functional, decent game that checks enough boxes to be playable, enjoyable, and forgettable. But from my perspective, that's not sustainable. Because here's the thing, if you assume that all of your games are just going to be a mild success, well, that's exactly what they're going to be. That's exactly what your developers are going to aim for. This isn't just playing it safe, it's embracing mediocrity as a business model. It's one thing to be realistic about your sales projections and expectations, but when you start baking that mentality into your development process, you create games that aren't trying to be great, they're just trying to exist. I want studios to be realistic about their sales projections, but I don't want that to impact how they actually make games, and I think that's what's going on here. Larian Studios' Sven Vinke talked extensively about making sure how to keep enough money in the tank to be able to make your game, how to budget your games appropriately. But at the exact same time, all he's ever talked about is wanting to make the biggest RPG ever and how Baldur's Gate 3 was a stepping stone to that goal. So maybe this strategy keeps Obsidian alive for now. Maybe it helps them avoid layoffs or corporate disasters that we see happening at bigger studios. But what happens when the industry evolves? What happens when players' expectations rise? And when good enough stops being good enough? We've already seen that happen. Look how Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 made Avowed feel like an afterthought. Look how Baldur's Gate 3 made Starfield look obsolete. The bar is rising, and the studios that aren't reaching for it at the very least are going to get left behind. Nobody builds a legacy on mild success. Managing expectations is important, but there's a fine line between smart budgeting and outright surrendering to mediocrity. If you're so focused on avoiding failure that you never take any risks, you never push yourself, you never aim for greatness, then what's the point? And beyond that, how does Xbox feel about mild success? Because let's be real, Obsidian doesn't really have the final say here. Arcane Austin dropped one single flop and now they're gone. Hi-Fi Rush had mild success and Tango Gameworks got wiped off the map. Did Microsoft really acquire Obsidian just for them to be comfortably average? Of course they didn't. How do you think Microsoft shareholders will respond to mild success when it turns into consistently underwhelming results? Because here's the reality. Mild success isn't stability. It's a slow death march towards irrelevance. I realize I'm going to have some detractors because some people really like the game. And do you know what? That's great. By the way, this isn't a video smearing the game. This is just a video that is saying, hey, there's obviously a problem here. We need to discuss this because that's how these studios can stick around longer. I doubt that a lot of people want Obsidian to close. I want Obsidian to stick around. But yeah, let's take a minute. Let's think about it. Let's have a thought experiment. We know that they're based in Irvine, California. They have over 300 developers. I'm going to take a wild guess and say they probably spent $100 million making the game. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. I'm probably pretty close, though. We know that they have sold, or at least they've had less than 1/4 of the concurrent players of Dragon Age the Veilguard on Steam. So Dragon Age the Veilguard sold 1.5 billion copies. So we'll take a wild guess and say they're probably right around about 400,000 copies sold. You take out Steam's 30%. Also think about the fact that it's being played on Game Pass. And you're looking at a game that likely made around $20 million. I don't know how much they subsidize for Game Pass or how long they give these games until they need to be profitable. But I'm going to take a wild guess and say that's not going to work. And keep in mind, Outer Wilds did sell 5 million copies. But it took them 4 years to get there. And also at the same time, even though that game was on Game Pass, well, Game Pass wasn't as big then. Xbox hadn't spent $70 billion acquiring Activision Blizzard. Xbox isn't also dealing with the issue that Call of Duty is losing relevance at a wild rate. It is crazy. You guys need to go look at that stuff. I still need to make a video on that. So that's a lot of money they're hemorrhaging over there right now. I just don't see this working in the long run. It's going to be too hard for them to justify if they keep costing them money. Because imagine if you're always aiming for mild success and then you miss. That's not good, man. That's not good. You know, I like hearing studios that are trying to be responsible, that are trying to budget themselves the right way. But I think the problem is that sometimes you can get too caught up in that and then you're not giving your developers the freedom that they need. I should have brought this up and I just had it pop into my mind right now. And the director of Obsidian was one of the same people that jumped forward and was talking about how Baldur's Gate 3 is an anomaly, way back when they had that big drama, and how, they don't really have a lot of autonomy because they don't have a lot of choice what they can do with their games because of money. And saying that that's why Baldur's Gate 3 succeeded is because they got to put their money in the right places and stuff like that. Which leads me to believe that they don't really have all that much control over their game or over the creative freedom of the games that they're making, which would lead to a lot of issues. That's the conclusion that I'm coming to at the very least. But I still believe, the other thing that I brought up is that studios and their obsessions with politics, especially with some of these folks, especially when it's your artist, it's your art director, that is going to be reflected in your game. And I think that Obsidian is now turning into one of those same studios that is walking down the wrong path, focusing on the wrong things, and not realizing what audiences want today. And you need to recognize that. Otherwise, you're going to lose them. And right now, Obsidian is losing them. Western studios, man, they just can't get their shit together. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you guys for watching. If you guys did enjoy, like the channel, like the video, subscribe to the channel, follow me on Twitch, follow me on Twitter. I ran over there as well. People have been really enjoying the random shit that I talk about on that side. So, you can hear me when I'm not on a video. Outside of that, stay cool, stay righteous, stay safe. Catch you guys in the next one.
Family, 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 family.